You're listening to the Courting Happiness podcast. This is a place where self-care becomes part of your day, a space where you learn evidence-based strategies to help your life, share it with those you love, and cultivate well-being at work. I'm your host, Dr. Kortni Alston. I'm a former news director, television reporter turned happiness scholar, TEDx speaker, and transformational trainer. I also understand hardships. While working my dream job in television, I lived a nightmare of suddenly becoming a young widow after 86 days of marriage. I became committed to learning more about resilience, healing, and happiness. This is how I discovered my area of research, which is positive psychology. Now I'm living my calling of training individuals and organizations on happiness. And now my new chapter begins with being happily engaged. The Courting and Courting Happiness is about a true courtship. I like to say commitment with happiness. The K in courting stands for the vulnerability of sharing my story, inspirational interviews with phenomenal people, the infusion of positive psychology, and so much more. You'll learn how to commit to your well-being, one episode at a time. I hope you subscribe and share. So, are you ready? Let's get started. Welcome to episode 19. Today, we're going to talk specifically about self-care in education, but keep in mind, no matter what profession you're in, you can benefit from this podcast. So let's get started. The demanding roles for teachers have magnified during the pandemic, from adopting new technology for online learning, coupled with student well-being, parents, and community, all while balancing their personal life and their own well-being. Well, today, we're going to have some answers to help you cope with the pandemic and restore your well-being, and you're in for a big treat as it relates to self-care. Kind of consider this an episode, really, that's your retreat, so to speak. Joining me is Dr. Katie Raher. She is a teacher, school psychologist, and educational leader. Dr. Raher has been working with schools for nearly 20 years. She's the founder of Constant Love and Learning. This woman is extraordinary. Dr. Raher is passionate about bringing more well-being, growth, and equity to schools through social and emotional learning, and of course, educator self-care. Dr. Raher, I'm so happy, as you guys can hear by the sound of my voice, I'm so happy to have her here today. Welcome to the Courting Happiness podcast.
Thank you so much for that introduction and for having me here. I'm so excited to be able to connect with you. I know that we found each other in a unique way, and I'm really honored to be here because I know that hanging out with you is a treat for me as well.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Raher. Honestly, I would say this to everyone. Dr. Raher invited me to her incredible community, and instantly, I felt like it was literally instant. We hit it off, which was ironic, but that was the first time we actually had a chance to kind of virtually meet. Although we live in this world now, we're all virtually meeting, right? But we hit it off and we connected. And this is one of the reasons why I'm sitting here. I'm so super excited because she is an incredible and extraordinary expert and provides such incredible resources to her community. So I'm super excited and actually honored that she's here on the podcast today. And so as I'm sitting here, and I'm thinking about that first encounter in terms of when Dr. Raher and I met, and we went and I actually talked to her community with it, which is Constant Love and Learning. Tell us more about your community. What is your community, Dr. Raher?
Yeah, so it's a group of educators. And by educator, I mean any people who work with children in some capacity. So I have teachers who teach general education, special education. I've got school counselors, school psychologists, speech pathologists, school social workers and therapists and administrators and paraprofessionals. Anybody who works, and is dedicated in their life to children, they tend to find their way to me. And it's a community who really sees the value in putting focus on the social and emotional work in terms of the way we support our students and also in terms of how we support ourselves.
It's an amazing community, and so you have really a great view in regards to what's going on in terms of education, right? Tell us some of the stories that you're coming across in your community as it relates to, so many of people in terms of education, in terms of how they're coping as relates to the pandemic.
Yeah, and there's such a big variety in that because educators have such a big span of circumstances. Some districts are more supportive, lots of districts. There's some demands, and educator well-being hasn't been necessarily put at the forefront. There's a wide variety of that across the country. There's different circumstances in terms of if people are working from home or they're expected to work in schools, if they've got kids of their own, if they have them around, like you mentioned in your introduction. So there is sort of a big range, but I will say across the board, a theme is that the stress levels are higher for everybody because of the things you mentioned in your introduction. And there's just so many new stressors that educators haven't had to cope with. Again, if you're in person, hybrid, distance learning, whatever it is, and people are a lot of the themes that are coming up too, not only are there stressors around making sure they themselves are safe, their students are safe, the technology, all those kinds of things, the drain that comes from being on Zoom all day or whatever. Um, but there's there's also it been a shift in how they're able to make the impact that they want. So I hear a lot of themes around it's it's hard when you don't get to actually do the magic and get some of that magic you get when you're face to face with students, and you get to, even if you are face to face in person as an educator, you're not able to get up close and, if you're working with littles and give a little hug to a little person, or those kinds of things, you're not able to do some of that personalized work that you can as easily when you're in schools. And so there's that paired with the other factors that are also stressors. And I've heard a range in terms of people's coping mechanisms around it. Some people are, as a result of that increase level of stressors and stress in their lives, some people are feeling more burnt out than ever. There is a lot more talk in the educator spheres right now. Not this isn't necessarily my community, but educators at large. There's a lot more talk of people going like, should I leave the profession? Can I handle this? So there's like a lot of burnout right now. And then on the flip side, there are people who have tools that they're using and cultivating to be able to resiliently navigate through these times. And there's no shame or blame on any of sides of this. Like the reality is people have the experiences they have, and all are valid. All the feelings right now are valid. And I do love when I'm in my community working with them and seeing them use the tools that we're cultivating and navigating that stress a little, more easily than if they didn't have tools. And I'll even share my own experience. I have a gigantic toolbox of tools to navigate stress that I've developed over years. And I feel like it definitely prepared me for the pandemic, because in the pandemic, several of my tools just went away. Like me being able to chit chat face to face with some of my, colleagues in the teacher's lounge or something like that, that's not there. So I've had to uh, really boost up the things that I already use that I can still use. And then I've had to also creatively cultivate new tools. Like, how can this work in my new situation? And that seems to be another theme I hear, that people are having to rethink and get creative on how they navigate all that's going on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and of course, many of you know who are listening that I'm a professor. So I am sitting here, I'm just nodding and what Dr. Raher is saying, because, it's about looking at how to create these new tools. I love when you shared how you're created your own toolbox, and because the visual nature in terms of that. And then also you talked about the teacher's lounge, right? Having that social connection is so very important in terms of our well-being. So now we're looking at what that looks like in terms of maybe a virtual setting. So what would you recommend for an educator that is missing that component in regards to, opening the door and there's the teacher's lounge and now we are home?
Yeah. And I think there's a variety in the need for that as well, because, we've got our introverts, our extroverts. I'm actually more of an ambivert myself. So I do thrive on the social interaction, but I also can benefit from some of that alone time. But regardless of who you are, we have to get creative. This is an opportunity to cultivate new tools. And so for me, I have gone on some socially distanced hikes with people. There's sometimes some Zoom calls, hopping on there. So I'll get on a Zoom call with a few people and chit chat. There's giving more permission to take the breaks that I need when I'm so I actually go in to my actual physical school, even though there's not kids there. And so giving myself more permission to, like, okay, go take a walk and find somebody to talk to, so there's a little bit of that.
Yeah.
And then I think getting creative as school teams can be helpful. My school's been wonderful about having some social opportunities, in terms of, Zoom little holiday things. I actually just started last week. It was my first proposed. We'll see how it goes, because a lot of people were like, "Ooh, I couldn't make it, but I want to come next time." We literally had a Zoom for about 10 minutes, and we had a group dance party on a Friday afternoon. I actually love to
Wow.
dance. So for me, that's like totally fills me up, because
Yeah,
dancing is one of my all-time favorite things to do. And I know
that's
that some people probably
fantastic.
got my emails and went, "Oh my gosh, this is ridiculous, and I'm not coming to a dance party," which is fine. So we each have to find our own thing. But having some exploration around what might work for you and getting creative in that, you know, and uh, it can be big or small. So introverts still need just as much connection. They just tend to prefer it in a smaller package, and so we can find it in the way I think that works for us, though.
I love what you shared in regards to all those different techniques. I also love the dance party, by the way. Um, I love the fact that it's so creative in terms of really our own social experiment, right? In regards to what works for us. But another thing you shared, Dr. Raher, is really permission, right? The permission in terms of giving yourself that time to maybe go out, giving yourself maybe those mini breaks that might have looked very different in the classroom or in the office. And now, since we're home, what that may now look like, but giving yourself permission is so key. And also, it speaks to so much in terms of thinking about the value of our self care and well being. So, why is putting ourselves first? Because one of the things that really stuck out to me was the value of all of those different experiences are really thinking about how to put yourself first. Why is it so important for us to prioritize that as it relates to our self-care?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to flip it upside down for a second, and then I'll get to your question. So it's really easy for lots of people, but in particular educators, and I would also say in particular women, to put everybody else first. And it's not any fault of our own. Society's actually given that message to us all along, that that's our role, and and so it's really easy for us to put everybody else first, everything else first. And while we may be helping others in some ways, that can really lead to some problems. That can lead to our burnout,
Mhm.
our overwhelm, our exhaustion, our then ultimate disconnect from the people that we actually love so much, and that we actually do want to take care of. Some people we may be taking care of that we're not thrilled about taking care of. Sometimes sometimes we're given jobs that we're like, oh. But there are the people we like, and as educators, our students, our colleagues, typically for most of us, those are the people they're in the sphere of people we really want to take care of. And so that's in part taken away, that connection. And when we do for everybody else and not for ourselves, we lose that connection with ourself. And when we don't have that connection with ourselves, it's very difficult to live a life that is filled with joy and peace and ease and the things that we all want in our lives. And so it's so important to prioritize ourselves. And like you said, like what resonated with you, it's one of my big things. Give yourself permission to prioritize yourselves, to add yourself to the list, put yourself to the top of that list, because not just because of the enhanced ability to take care of others, but because you are human first. You deserve well-being. You are just a worthy person in and of itself. You don't need to take care of others to be worthy. You don't need to do anything to be worthy of that care. And so it is about permission, and you don't need to give, ultimately it would be ideal if just everybody felt, yes, I deserve to take care of myself. But oftentimes I feel like as educators, if I tell myself, I give myself permission to prioritize me,
Mhm.
it can be powerful. Even in my program of educator well-being support, I actually have a full-on permission form that people sign just to kind of enact it and put it, some people that may not work for, but for the people who it's like, when I put it in writing, I am going to do this. I have that for them too, because it is about putting ourselves first. And that is then what allows us to have the resilience. Because well-being isn't just about having the happiness and the gratitude, which I know are amazing, but it's
They
it's
are.
it's about using those tools and using other tools to then be able to navigate the sometimes roller coaster that life can be. As the 2020-2021 school year is making it very clear.
It really is. It's interesting. You're right in terms of that roller coaster. I will tell you this. I love what you also shared in regards to the permission slip. You know, because for those of you who are listening are like, well, wait a minute, where can I begin? I love that Dr. Raher is really thinking about that permission slip, giving ourselves that permission, right? In terms of making sure that we prioritize our self care and our well being. So, for those of us who are very grateful for the permission slip, and so thankful that wow, it's okay. It's okay that I take a break. It's okay that I focus in on my well being. It's okay that I do that. But for those of us who are still apprehensive in regards to where do I begin, what advice would you offer to educators in terms of how do they begin to prioritize their self-care? Because as you mentioned earlier, when you're putting so many people before yourself, right, that's why the importance of putting oneself first. How do they go about prioritizing that?
I think for those of you who are apprehensive, first of all, I just want to validate that, because that was me most of my career. I thought, I can't take care of myself. I'm trying to take care of everybody else. Like, I'm just that, it would be selfish is what I thought, to put myself first. And in fact, it's the opposite of
Mhm.
selfish, because when we take care of ourselves, that really is what allows us to more effectively make the impact we want to make. Because and not just for the short term, but for the long haul. Because even if, yes, I worked my butt off to like be the best, in schools and whatnot, but then I burned out, and then I really didn't show up very present for my students, for my family, for my own kids, because I was burnt out. And so when we take care of ourselves, I love that Audre Lorde talks about how, self-care is not selfish, it's not self-indulgent, it's self-preservation. And it's what allows us to, she talks about it as it's not just doing the work, but it's political warfare. It's what allows us to keep fighting the fights that we want to fight. So like for me, I'm like super passionate about educational equity, and I have to be filled up to show up and do that work, and so and just to elaborate a little bit on that, we know from what benefits young children, college age students, as like a professor, we know the one thing that's so consistent across all the research is that what helps students thrive in schools, the number one thing is when they feel connected. They feel like they are in a positive relationship. And so our capacity to show up in that way requires that we've taken care of ourselves, and to be able to cultivate those positive relationships our students need. Now, in terms of being able to get, so hopefully that's one way to get started, is just to realize I'm not being selfish. I deserve this, I'm worthy of this, and this is going to help all the people I care about. So that's one piece of the puzzle. And connecting, I think, to your why is important. When we, if your big why as an educator is that you want to make an impact on children, which is most of the reason most of us got into this, that helps in part, because it's not just about me. I'm not trying to just ignore the world. It's because this gets me connected to myself and to others. And then another big piece, I think, of being able to commit to it is to tell your people about it. Tell your people about what your intentions are, and set an intention around what you want to bring into your world. I desire more flow and ease in my life. I desire more happiness. I desire more fulfillment, whatever it is. I desire more presence. I want to cultivate more self-love, whatever the intention is that you want to sort of be your sort of like North Star guiding you through your days. Then tell the people who love you what your intention is and what you need from them to be able to help that happen. So to give you an example, if I want to set a boundary around work hours, for example, because I am somebody, I'll just name it. I'm a perfectionist in recovery, and I could work 24 hours probably around the clock. And I did that most of my career, literally. Like I would pause to take care of my own kids. And then after they went to bed, I would work for however many hours after. And that was not good for me. And I had major crash and burn with my physical and mental health. And so that's a pattern that I got into in my life. And we all have patterns, and they're there because at some point in our lives, they served a purpose, and they allowed us to get through whatever we needed to get through, resiliently. And they may not be serving us anymore. I know, for example, the workaholic thing, not serving me anymore. And so, and generally doesn't serve anyone, but you know what I mean? So,
Absolutely.
I tell my husband, okay, I need you to come in and make sure I stop work at this time, or I need you to remind me to stop work at this time, or whatever it is, because then it takes away any potential for self-sabotage of me falling back on my old patterns, because I have somebody who loves me too, reminding me of the self-love that I wanted to also hold for myself. And so, this doesn't just have to be someone you live with. It can be, an educator bestie who you're like, hey, can you give me a call at 5? Because I want to like hard stop my work no matter what got done. And I want someone to also tune in and tell me what you did today was enough. And you can put it down and you can rest now, or whatever that may look like. But so telling your people, I think, is important to get, because you shouldn't have to do all this on your own. It's a team sport.
It
So
is.
yeah.
I love that. I love that because let's salute your husband for
He's an educator too.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
He's a math teacher.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so he knows, right? And so I love the fact that he's an accountability partner, right? And really in terms of this. And so I love so much what you shared as it relates to the fact that it's important to have that team in place to kind of help serve you, and really you're serving each other, right, in terms
Yeah.
of making sure you're meeting those goals in terms of well-being and self-care. It's interesting because when Dr. Raher was sharing this information, I was thinking about your Instagram page and how transformative it is, because you talk about teams, you talk about the importance of that. And also recently, Dr. Raher posted about every educator deserves to have an IWP and an IWP team. So tell us, what is an IWP and the team, and why is it so impactful, since we're already talking about the value and the importance of having that team?
Yeah. So IWP stands for Individualized Well-Being Plan, and your team is the team that's helping you really put that into place. And let me just, if it's okay, I'll tell you a little history of where
Absolutely,
this idea
please.
came from.
Yes.
So as an educator, as a teacher turned school psychologist, I definitely support kids in developing IEPs, so individualized education, plans for which really are intended to make sure we really understand a child's needs, unique needs, and then we create a plan that really will give them what they need and allow them to grow and thrive. And then there's a whole team, an IEP team of different perspectives and different people who all care about this child, who then work together to make sure we develop the optimal IEP and that we also really make sure we implement it as well as possible to continue to support this child. And it it evolves over time. We reconvene and make sure that, do we need to make any changes, how can we even continually better support this child. So that's sort of, that IEP vision. That's like in the back of my mind, always about how to support people, and even kids who don't have IEPs. Every child, ultimately, that's what educators are doing. We differentiate our instruction. We're trying to connect with that student on an individualized basis to really understand their needs and respond. And so this was about 4 years ago at this point. I mentioned I had had a big physical mental health crash and burn, and I was trying to find my way back to well-being. And I was sitting there talking to one person who is on my IWP team, myself, and I was thinking about the support they were giving me. It was just a friend. And I was thinking about how I had just gone to an acupuncture appointment, and I had spoken to my therapist, and I was getting a call from my husband, and blah blah blah, and I was like, it's like I have an IEP team. And then all of a sudden this light bulb goes on. Oh, I have an IWP team, and I need an IWP. Like, every single person needs a well-being plan that is based on a deep understanding of that person. It's that deep self-awareness of what you need, what you respond to, and then having a team of people, those people who love you. Uh, and sometimes, like my therapist, I paid, but sometimes I just, but you don't need
Shout
to,
out to great therapists.
yeah, yeah, but you don't need to have anybody paid. Like, you can just be your
Yeah,
people, but everybody
absolutely.
needs that, and everybody needs this group of people who are always advocating for you too, in big or subtle ways. And um and 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 with an IEP team, we actually ideally always have the student on the team. Like, they're part of
Mhm.
that team, and so we ourselves are part of our team. And I like to also think about how our intuition is a huge part of that team as well. It's so it's not just this external support, because ultimately we have so much capacity to build our own, that self-awareness, and we have
Absolutely.
this wise inner voice that really does know what is the best IWP for me, and not just in the package, but in every moment. We Everybody, all of you are listening out there, you all have everything you need within you in terms of the capacity to build that resilience. Yes, it's helpful to have people support you and have tools, but you have within you so much capacity for resilience, and you have that capacity for self-love. I mean, your intuition really is the voice of self-love, always somebody internally looking out for you.
I love that. The voice of intuition is the voice of self love. I
Did I just say
love
that?
that. That
I
is
agree.
that I agree. I mean, that is beautiful. That is something that is a true affirmation, right? Is and so I love that. Also, I love how you talked about the IWP team because, one of the things that I always share is the importance of having a self-care squad and having that social support of people who are your accountability partners that can really serve you. And I love what you shared as it relates to the IWP team. Another element is, you know, you talked about, you notice I'm already including myself in there. So I'm like, but Dr. Raher just talked about, Dr. Raher just talked about even having your therapist as part of that team. And I think that's something that is so beneficial. That's why I got so excited. I said, shout out to great therapists, shout out to therapists out there, because it's so important. I will tell you, because over the years of going through my journey of being a widow and going through different levels of transition in my life, my therapists have been incredible. And currently, as I'm sitting here talking to Dr. Raher, I'm thinking about my current therapist and how she's a part of my self-care squad. She would tell me, you know what? What are you going to do for yourself? What are you going to do for yourself today? And so it's great to be able to have all of these people in your life that are serving you and serving you as it relates to your well-being. And I've also found it beneficial when I've done and spoken to other individuals and professionally talking about the importance of really having a check-in with with a therapist. What are your thoughts in terms of that?
I mean, if I ran the world, everybody would have a therapist. It wouldn't be something you had to spend out of pocket for. I think everybody deserves to have a space where they are held with unconditional regard and love, and that they can process whatever they need to process. Um, some people do have friends that can hold space for them, but there is something different about a best friend holding space for you and the way a therapist holds space for you. So yeah, if I ran the world, everybody would have one. And so, but yes, big shout out to the therapists. And it's unfortunate that can be so costly. And I will just give a little plug to always check a lot of at least public institutions for education do have employee assistance programs that do have some options for seeking therapy in some capacity, even if it's just short term. And a lot of people, when I mention that to them, they're like, really? Do I have access to that? So in the schools that when I support, and so just as just a general note that you can look into that, because it's so powerful. And I think that there's a lot of stigma around getting mental health support in this country, and I'm sure in other countries. But you know, I just want to validate the fact that everybody needs a place to process. And yes, yeah, just to, again, like to be held in that unconditional positive regard. And so even just a shift in that of just saying, yeah, it's okay for me to do that. Yes, I deserve to talk about what's going on for me. Even a shift in that is powerful. And if you're not quite there yet, you know, ready for that, I would say that even just practicing vulnerability with the people you love is one piece of that puzzle too. So that can look like different things. It can be with a person who you're very close to, but that could also be finding some type of group where you can connect, a self-care squad that you might not even be as familiar with. But actually, when I was saying I was talking to someone when I was telling my story of how I came to the IWP concept, it was somebody who I was talking to who I met in a women's circle. It was really a healing circle. And when I first started attending those women's circles, because somebody who was close to me told me, you've really got to try this. It's amazing. It's like transformational. And I thought, okay, my ambivert side was like, I don't know, a bunch of women in the room, like talk. I was like, I don't know. So, and I was raised with definitely some stigma around like mental health being the messaging for me. So, but I went and I persisted with this group, and it was like medicine to
Wow.
not only practice vulnerability myself, but to hear others do the same. And if we want to talk about permission again,
Mm-hmm.
there's something so empowering about seeing another person giving themselves permission to be vulnerable, because it ultimately gave me permission to, like, oh, I can do this too. It's okay to tell my deep dark secrets of the fact that, oh wow, I have a lot of things I have no idea about. I have so much, like that is imperfect about me, which was, it was some of the first steps for me to get into recovery as a perfectionist. was to be like, oh yeah, I got a lot of stuff going on. And so yeah, so I think wherever you are on your continuum and your journey, you can start there and still find places that can hold space for you. But yes, but but yeah, I won't ever run the world because that's not my vision of what I want to do with the world. But yes, I would love for everyone to have access to a therapist or some type of community that can do that, holding space for them.
Well, you know what? You are running the world to me, Dr. Raher. You are running it to me, and you're just in terms of your work and also really how you're serving the world. You are an incredible person, and I got to tell you that one of the things that I love in terms of what you've just shared is you mentioned vulnerability, and we've talked about the value in terms of teams. How important is it in terms of having that reciprocity, right? In terms of having people that are part of the team that understand the importance of vulnerability, understand the importance of active listening, and also come with some levels of empathy throughout that dynamic. How important is that in terms of kind of really crafting or creating that your well-being team?
I definitely think people need people around them who are going to be active listeners, who are going to have that empathy for them. And I would say that if you do not have that, to get creative in reaching out and trying to make connections, like for example, finding a women's circle or something, or I have a community where we meet as well. But there's virtual circles out there, and so finding some place to have people hold that for you. I have a friend, actually, she's a parent educator actually, and but we met because our kids were in the same class, and I connected her to this one women's circle that I like to go to virtually. And it's like finding, she was like, oh my gosh, it's like my people, it's people who just listen, and I can be all myself. And there's something so powerful about that can lead to your well-being, because you feel in alignment, you
Mhm.
feel loved, and you feel heard, you feel seen. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that's all anybody needs. Like we need to feel heard, seen, and be able to show up in the world as our full selves, and know that that's the way it should be. That's okay. That's the beauty of all of us. um, and if your people are not that way, sometimes we are around people who are not that way. We can also take steps still to take action sort of that's within our own control to still optimize relationships. So if, I don't know, your spouse or your grade level team partner or whatever is not like that, I can still do things to navigate my days and my interactions with them to still make them as positive as possible. So I can still go into the situation thinking, you know I've done enough, or I'm enough no matter what the response is. I can use some nonviolent communication to tell them how you feel about something in a situation. You can set boundaries and stand up for yourself if somebody keeps sort of maybe taking advantage of you. We can set that boundary that I'm not going to be doing that anymore. I'm not going to you know I'm not going to take on that responsibility. That's not going to work out for me this time, or whatever it is. And so we can, the way we move through the world will have an impact on others. If we do run through the world, not run through the world, but go through the world with that some of these well-being principles, it's a mirror to people, and there's like some interesting things that can happen. And on the flip sides, we're going to obviously sometimes show up very raw and messy, and not, and not in our best space, and that's fine because life happens. And so we're going to sometimes show up cranky and whatnot. And even in those moments, we can name that. I always like to be like, I'll even tell my own kids, like, I didn't sleep well. I'm not in a great mood today. I'm just warning you. And, and I do the same thing with students or with colleagues. Like, I'm just letting you know, like, if I'm a little sniffy today, I am so sorry, but I am tired or I am whatever. And so it's, so we can navigate it a little bit that way. But there's ripple effects, and you can all think about when somebody comes into a meeting with us who's in a like deep dark mood. We can have empathy for them, but sometimes it can shift the mood in the room. There's those ripple effects. And on the flip side, when somebody comes in with that optimism, and this is not like toxic positivity, this is not about like invalidating what's real and naming that, but just with the optimism about the potential for growth regardless of whatever is real. There is something that like you might leave that meeting too being like, okay, yeah, we're gonna make this work. So that was a long answer, and there's no easy answers to that when you have people in your life that are not as filled with the vision that vulnerability and empathy matter. But I think working on yourself is what's always within our control, and we can start there. And in setting those boundaries, that's a powerful piece of it. And then there are some times where we have to make the choice that certain people don't get to have my energy anymore. I mean, that's the boundaries, right? Like, and that's even a bigger boundary. Sometimes there are certain people that I'm going to do what I can to not be around that person anymore. And that's a justifiable thing. Now, it's a little trickier if you work with them and you're like in a school or something like that, but we can still take steps to protect ourselves, because you deserve to have ownership over your energy and your gifts. So
Absolutely, absolutely. When you mentioned boundaries, I kept on nodding because you and I've talked about the value of boundaries before, and it's an important process that we have, especially as relates to setting healthy boundaries. I just talked about that in episode 18, and tell us, because as a psychologist, tell us why setting boundaries are so important as it relates to our self-care.
I would say they're one of the most important pieces of your self-care. And it takes courage
Mm.
to set boundaries. And I'll I'll tell you a little bit of part of my vision of boundaries is not just about the boundaries we set with other people. It's also the boundaries we set with ourselves around certain things. But really what a boundary is about: deciding what you're going to say yes to and what you're going to say no to. And remembering that every time I say yes to something, something else has to receive a no. There is no, there's no way to expand the 24 hours a day thing. We got what we got. And so when I am asked to do something, or somebody is not even asking me, but they're basically telling me or just taking space or coming into my space and my boundaries with either with their words, with their demands, with whatever it is, when I commit to something with that, I've said no to something else. So maybe it's no to time with my family. Maybe it's no to another opportunity that I love. Maybe if I, as an educator, if I said yes to some committee that was an extra something or another, maybe that means I had to say no to, maybe somebody now the next day says, hey, do you want to be on this amazing podcast with Dr. Kortni or whatever? And they're like, I can't because I said yes to this, I mean, something as basic as that, but, and it's also, maybe it's then I don't have the time to take care of myself. And so for me, for example, I most of my career said yes to everything else, which basically was a no to myself again and again and again. And then my physical and mental health crashed. And we deserve better than that. We deserve to set boundaries, and we are worthy of that. And kind of like what I was saying, that when I was in my women's group, that people were giving me permission to open up and be vulnerable. Something I love about boundaries too is that, because in educator spheres, in other caregiver spheres, the boundary thing sometimes is shamed. Like, you should just do everything. Like, that's the messaging. And it's always so empowering though to me when I hear people setting boundaries, because again, it gives other people permission to do the same. So sometimes it's like, I'll set a boundary, and then so I've had a couple of people come up to me like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know I could say no. I didn't even know that was an option, or I just thought, like, as an educator, I if my boss comes and asks me something, I have to say yes, and we don't have to, boundaries don't have to just, well, first of all, they can be a no. No is a complete sentence, and that can be an answer, because that ultimately is all you need to protect your energy. And we do need to protect our own emotional, mental, physical well-being. And we can also say in other ways, we can, I can say if my boss asks me to do something, I could say, you know what, I understand that you need that to get done. Can we talk about a more creative solution? Because the way that it sounds right now is not going to work for me. That's going to make it so I have to work however many hours, and I'm not willing to, sacrifice my health for that. And when we do that, it can start the conversation going. And I'm going to give a big permission slip to everyone listening out there that to do these kinds of things, because I think if we all were to do this, we would see these cultures shift in our schools, in our institutions, because if everybody's saying no, something's got to shift.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and ultimately, everybody at sort of all levels of education, I understand that everybody's sort of dealing with the demands that have been put on them from the top, like the superintendents or the chancellors, deans, whatever, all the way, through the entire team. We all have these demands placed on us, but we can all push back and push the creative thinking. But in part, we do have to have some foundation of well-being there to even be able to do that creative thinking. That's like one of the pieces of well-being. If you're so burnt out, being creative in your thinking is much more challenging. It's harder for us to navigate any problems. So even just, and this is part of boundary setting, is that even just doing micro doses of self-care, tiny little things that can make you feel like, okay, I got this, I can do this, can lead us to being filled up to the, so we are empowered to set those boundaries. And I think I'm going to come back to the intuition piece. I think ultimately when it comes to boundaries, we all are very much, we're not necessarily aware of what boundaries need to be set, but we all have these little things that happen inside us that looks a little different, or a little voice, or a little something in my, like mine happens like right kind of at the bottom of my ribs. It's like where I have this like gut feeling. We talk about gut feelings, and we all have something that can guide us. Sometimes our intuition's quiet and sometimes it's louder, but we all have experiences of that intuition guiding us. And I think anybody listening out there can think of like a time where you're like, yeah, I was really clear on the fact that I was going to set a boundary, or I was really clear on my yes or no in that situation, or I felt uncomfortable, or whatever it is. And the more we can tap into that, the more we can set boundaries that are like really are in alignment with us. And to bring it back to where I started in terms of the boundaries are not just with others, but they're also with ourselves. Sometimes we'll also get this inner voice telling us that like, oh, I need to set a boundary with myself. So for example, I had started to, really mostly because it was over the summer and I had gotten sort of in a habit, but I had started to always check my phone for all things before I got out of bed. So, I actually start my morning with a little meditation. And so that's great. But then I was like, oh, let me check my email. Let me check my blah, blah, blah. And then like however much later, I've wasted all this time. I started my day really thinking about work when I could have just enjoyed the present moment and my kids and, all the things before everything has to start. And then it also prevented me from doing some of the things in the morning that really fill me up. It ended up making me feel rushed because I was now like trying to hustle through things because I was just like, scrolling through things. And I started to get that little internal voice going, oh, this doesn't feel great. And not in a, and in, I had to practice being non-judgmental with myself. It wasn't about shaming myself for that, but just getting curious about, well, why did this start? Why, and you say, and that can be true for boundaries with others. Like, why did I get into this pattern with this person, with this situation, with myself, and getting curious. And then from a place of love, making a choice, what do I want to shift? What does my intuition say here? My intuition was saying, no more scrolling the phone in the morning, and then of course there's sort of more tangible actions that we can take to then make whatever we desire come to fruition. So I had to get creative. Like I put things that blocked my phone and did different things to help me in that situation. But ultimately, yeah, boundaries with others, with ourselves, are key to making space for the yeses that we actually want in our life.
I love that, making space. And I love that you shared it in terms of it being a lesson, right? In terms of the people around us. I will tell you as a professor, when I have to say no to something, and especially if I'm talking to a student, I make it a learning moment, in terms of why I have to say no right now. And students, many of them have actually appreciated it because they go, wow, I didn't realize you were doing that, or I didn't realize you were doing this. And hopefully, because I always let them understand the why in that. I said, because one day you're going to be balancing quite a bit. And I want them to understand that, wow, if she is telling me it's okay not to balance the world, then, it's okay. And trust me, guys, it is taking me, I'm still a work in progress in this area, by the way. So I'm
Me too. Me
uh,
too. It's
yes,
always a work in progress.
a work in progress because
Always.
because as you're sitting here talking, I'm like, yes, I can relate to that. Yes, I can relate to that. But it really is a work in progress. But I think when we are transparent on certain levels as relates to our boundaries, depending on what the circumstance is, because one of
Yeah.
my mentors would say, well, no, it's a complete sentence. And so but I'm not good with that all the time. I don't just say no without saying the
Me too.
why. Yeah, like
Me too. I'm more
um
of a why girl too.
so I think we all have really what's gonna better suit us in terms of our personality type, but then also our comfort zone. So I love so much of what you just shared in terms of the importance of boundaries and what that looks like as it relates to self. But then also you talked about micro self-care. What does that look like for an educator while they're trying to balance the demands of the pandemic? Because earlier you mentioned um, being Zoom, and really you were talking about you talked about Zoom exhaustion, which is a thing, by the way. And so how does an educator, go about doing these micro levels of self care while they are really creating boundaries, which can be really hard to do when you're home working remotely. So, what do you recommend in terms of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in part tuning into that self-awareness and figuring out what works for you, because what's going to work for you and me and different, I mean, everyone's going to need something a little different. And the most common thing I hear about, oh, I don't have time for self-care, is I don't have enough time. And that was definitely one of my go-tos. I don't have enough time to take care of myself. I already have these gazillion other things, but it doesn't have to be this long thing. It's the 30-second thoughts we have in our own minds. It's the like first thing in the morning, and I'll tell you the story of how I got here too. When I was really down and out and not feeling well. Like I was sleeping 2 hours a night. It was bad when I was not doing well. And I thought like I have no idea how to make myself feel good again. And somebody on my IWP team told me, just, she said, can you start the morning by drinking a glass of water? I was like, okay, I can do that. Like that takes a minute. Okay, I can do that. And it's these tiny micro doses of things that help us realize, oh, I can do that. That wasn't hard. That was an easy thing to integrate into my routine. And then we kind of build from there and we realize like, oh, I can do this too. And even that super powerful. As an educator, I used to get like through the day and was like, did I drink any water today? I don't know if I did, did I go to the bathroom, or whatever. It's like basic, that's like basic necessities. And it's not just that, it is also, it's the things we tell ourselves. So,
Very true.
self-care to me is also about, at the end of the day, me telling myself, I did enough today, or I give myself grace for however that lesson went. Maybe, I worked and I wanted it to go a certain way and it didn't, which I think happens more than not with having to facilitate lessons over electronic means. And, and that was good enough. Like I give myself grace, I hold myself with compassion. And so those things we can do on a little regular basis. And I know you're a huge advocate for gratitude. Gratitude can be practiced in such tiny doses that, it doesn't have to take 30 minutes of me journaling. Some people thrive with writing it down. I love your jar method. I don't know if you want to talk about that, but and I told some people and they love it. I tried it and it was harder for me. What I found worked for me is telling the people who I'm grateful for. I like directly tell them what I'm grateful for and why. And that's been more powerful for me to do more of that. And also like when I put my head on the pillow at the end of the night, I go through and I think of who and what I'm grateful for. And I think of the happiest moments of my day and I kind of visualize them and it helps me sleep better. So it's like these little tiny things that take not that long. My new thing I'm working on actually is trying to boost some movement, because I found that in the pandemic, I'm not moving nearly as much as I once did. Usually when you work at a school of some sort, you're walking to your classroom and back, and you're moving a lot. And you're with students, you're walking around the classroom, you're like standing to teach or whatever. And now it's like I just sit at a computer. So I've been actually trying to, it sounds silly, but I've been like, when I go to the bathroom, I jump up and down 10 times. And I get like however many jumps in a day. It's kind of silly, but it's actually inspired by BJ Fogg's work of Tiny Habits. Um, but
Doesn't sound silly at all.
it's
At
like,
all.
it's actually getting me movement and I'm feeling
Yes.
better and I'm like getting my
Yes.
lymphatic system to move a little bit. And so I may not have the answer for each person listening in terms of their tiny microdose, but starting small is actually how we cultivate that continual growth. That is,
Yes.
and people will ask me now, for example, because now I'm in a good flow in terms of certain components of my life. Like I eat really healthy now at this point for my health, and people will say, how did you like get all, like that seems like a lot, and it's actually not a lot for me, but it took years to get to this place. It took me trying one new recipe a week. It took me, it's like these little tiny things and figuring out how to build that up. But um, the other piece I'll say, in addition to just starting tiny, is that it always works best when all of our decisions about what we're going to do is just rooted in love and not out of a place of shaming. It's more about, what do I need? What would fill me up, rather than, oh my gosh, like now you're not doing a good enough job on self-care too. Like educators are already getting plenty of problematic messages from all over, and it's so much more important to give ourselves the messages of compassion and love. And that's actually how we build up more, just that resilience and the capacity to keep taking those little tiny actions towards taking care of ourselves.
I love it. Those tiny steps. And I love how you talked about the journey of getting there, because I think that's so important, because when we're going through anything in life, we have a tendency to look where someone is in terms of, oh gosh, they're so successful and I see that they're right here. But, I love the fact that you discuss what it took to get there, right? Because that's where the permission also comes into play in regards to, well, give yourself the time. Give yourself that time. I love that in terms of giving ourselves permission for time.
And just, can I say one last thing on that too?
Absolutely.
Oh, just that that to also be aware that it's going to keep happening over and over again. So even though I was like, oh, I've got this, I'm in a rhythm, I was like,
Yeah.
oh, here's a pandemic. So we're gonna start over some of these things. So I had to figure it out again. Kind of like the movement thing. It's like, oh no. So, just honoring that and holding, having grace for yourself as you figure out the next phase. So yeah.
I love it. I love it. So I would love to know this. What is the one thing that you do to commit to your happiness? I say that because, of course, this is courting happiness. This is all about really what we all can do to commit to our well being, right? And so every episode is about empowering people to do just that. And so I would love to hear from you in terms of the fact of being, here you are, Dr. Katie Raher, and you are a school psychologist, an incredible teacher, and really this impactful, extraordinary woman that's created a community to help people continue to grow and to enrich them as it relates to their well being. So, of course, we have to know what is the one thing you do to commit to your happiness?
I do a lot. So picking one, that's always hard for me. I will say, I think that the number one thing I do is I consistently work on my inner voice. I feel like working on my mindset has been the most profound because that allows me to continue to commit. So my previous voice used to always tell me to not take care of myself and that everything I was doing wasn't enough and I needed to do more. And so cultivating the self-awareness around my mindset and then practicing compassionately responding to myself. And it's a practice, it's a work in progress. But I think when I do that, it helps me have permission to do the other things that really that's what brings me all this joy, is that I'm able to navigate it with my mindset, with this shift in my mindset. It's the reframing of the many things that come our way. Yeah.
I love it. So that reframing is so important. I can't believe I can talk to Dr. Raher all day. I don't even want to end this episode, but I certainly want to end it with allowing people to know where they can find you.
Yeah. So my website is constantloveandlearning.com. And as you can tell from this episode, I'm all about love and learning. And I also can be found on Instagram, actually at Katie, Katie _ constant love and learning. And on Facebook, it's whatever, facebook.com / constant love and learning. And so those are the best places to find me. And on my website, there's a lot of free resources there. There's a self-compassion meditation. There's some fun there's like a pandemic educator self-care bingo you could do with your staff. There's also
Wow.
tools on there about social and emotional learning, and that you could use to cultivate your own well-being, but also really, to in direct connection to students. And I would love for you to subscribe so that you can get my regular newsletters. It's usually a mixture of me sending resources about social emotional learning for kids and then for us. And so if you head to my constantloveandlearning.com website, you can find ways to subscribe. And I'd love to be connected with people. I love to bring this work out into the world. I love to support individual educators, but also I love to think creatively about how to shift systems so everybody is thinking more strategically about how to support educators, because it shouldn't all be put on the educators. The systems need to shift too, so that educators start already with a better playing field.
Absolutely, absolutely. I will tell you this, that Dr. Raher's resources are just incredible and extremely transformative. She provides so much impactful information. And so I'm so happy that she spent time with us today. I love so much. That's why I kept on chuckling, because I was just so enamored with the fact, I'm like, wow, I see myself there. I resemble that comment. And I loved in terms of what you shared as it relates to how do we go about protecting our self-care and the importance of having these small steps and creating boundaries. Thank you so much for giving us the greatest permission slip ever, Dr. Raher. We really appreciate having you here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this transformative conversation with Dr. Katie Raher. I can't say thank you enough to Dr. Raher for joining us and sharing her incredible expertise concerning educator well-being. Let's continue this conversation online. Join us on Instagram at Courting Happiness. Don't forget, it's courting with a K. Also, you can join us in terms of our private Facebook community. Again, that's Courting Happiness podcast community on Facebook. Our private Facebook community is a safe haven to share, meet more people looking to build positive relationships, focus on well-being, and create a happier life. Are you ready to spread happiness? I hope you subscribe and share this podcast with your family, friends, coworkers, and all the important people in your world. We release a new episode every Thursday. Congratulations on your continued commitment to your courting happiness journey. We want you to be well, be happier, and be kinder to yourself. We can't wait to see you next week.